I was trying to get her attention and say, that's enough. That's enough.
I cut some out.
Yeah. Again, welcome to American Baptist College. Amen. The Holy Hill. Yeah. I very much enjoyed the opening program last evening and watching with you the HBO documentary, King in the Wilderness. How touching it is to renew our own spirits in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Indeed, King was an Exodus prophet. He gave his total human capacities to lead America out of her own imperial Egypt in the 1960s. But as you know, he did not cross the Red Sea to the promised land of beloved community. And we are still striving to get there in 2018. As much as now King is a cultural icon in the memory of America, it surpasses our grasp the weight of glory he leaves to guide America through the dark realities that we face today. After watching the documentary and getting home, my reflections came upon quotes from H. Richard Niebuhr and Alan Busak. Now, I had not planned to begin my presentation with quotes from them, but I'm trying to connect my own struggles and gratitude to God for the life of Martin Luther King Jr. and the context of why you are here on the ABC campus, and who together we represent in this moment what we might become. Amen. Amen. Niebuhr says, the past is our present in our conscious and unconscious memory. To understand such a present past is to understand one's self, and through understanding, to reconstruct. And in the words of Alan Busak, one is only human because of others. Yes, sir. One is only human because of others, with others, and for others. It is apparent that Martin Luther King is present in our conscious and unconscious memory for purposes to reconstruct what it means to be a human being, or as Busak puts it, because of others, with others, and for others. And I'm glad that we represent that possibility. It is apparent that Martin Luther King is present, and because of his presence, if honesty prevails, we all struggle both with how to reconstruct the relational qualities of our common humanity, particularly as we witness the demonic display of violence and inhumanity today. Yeah. Amen. So I enthusiastically joined this Theology and Peace Conference as your institutional host for possible reconstruction of a new humanity, or as I describe it in this presentation, stitching life, love, and liberation together. All right. Each of us comes here with a passion to reconcile this nation to a God of justice. I see the selection of the conference theme, Invitation to Beloved Community, as an opportunity for serious engagement, particularly a national dialogue about what justice in a beloved community looks like and means for the times in which we live. I was in New York May 7, 2018, to celebrate the life of James H. Cone, the founder of Black Liberation Theology. The Saturday morning when I heard of his death, I was working on this talk, reading an article he wrote entitled "The Challenge of Race in America." In that article, Cone stated he was a theological activist, trying to understand the challenge that race poses for faith and the church in society. Cone proceeded to ask the question, what is it about the Christian faith that makes it necessary for theology and the church to engage the problem of race in America and in the world? I'm a child of the Black church, of its theology, as was Martin Luther King Jr. I'm a Jesusonian disciple, as was Martin Luther King Jr. But rare has there been one who touched our lives so deeply with the truth of Jesus than Martin Luther King Jr. I must pause. After watching the documentary last night and reading his materials, his lived theology over these years, I must pause. A moment in the deepest sense of piety that I know to thank God for this prophet of God who gave the qualities of love to us in a way that none has in our memory. We can so easily capture him up in our enthusiasm to embrace an icon and forget what he really contributed to our flourishing. King, who gave his life trying to answer Cone's question for America. That same question has hung over my life as a youngster, unconscious of its implications, and as an adult, conscious of a country that forces you to ultimately deal with your own ontology of what it means to be Black and Christian in the ethos of America's original sin of racism. So after these years of being in the Theological Academy, president of this historic Christian liberal arts Black college, a theological educator, father, and husband, I find it necessary to thank God for the ancestors. And I wonder why it was necessary for America to take the best of my ancestors so that God could give us the best of what they were to the world. I wonder why it has taken so many of us. There are a host of others, including my deceased father, W.T. Harris, my great-grandma Sally, who midwifed me and my twin brother into the world, and unsung martyrs that tried to answer that question with blood, sweat, and tears. And it is the reason I think we are gathered here to dialogue about an invitation to beloved community. The only way possible this could be is that our ancestors gave us so much. Black, white, yellow, First Nation people gave us so much for us to be in this moment. And I wonder how open is the invitation to beloved community still is today. Can we offer that invitation with integrity? Or can we only plagiarize the invitation because it's been printed in the archives of king's blood and the ancestors that we have sometimes forgotten? You recall Jesus' parable of an invitation sent out to a prominent citizen, sent out by a prominent citizen of the first century to people to join his great banquet feast. The invitation went out to the social elites, liberal religionists, economically secure of the society. Systems arrangements, probably imperial duties or domesticated priorities got in the way of them, and they turned down the invitation. The story says, we just can't come. But the prominent citizen of the community said to the custodians of the banquet planning, reissue the invitation. Not to those who refused the invitation, but to the poor of society who live on the margins of Romans' imperialism. Our gathering might be a consideration of reissuing the invitation to the moral vision of beloved community, which today warrants a serious critique of a culture in America that refuses acceptance of this invitation over and over again. That's why I was so excited about you coming, because I thought the theme's topic or the theme's focus is a reissuing. Did you not think that, Brother Sharp? A reissuing of the invitation. But I've got the invitations that were sent to me that was not serious in the context in which I live. That's the reason why I turned down a whole lot of invitations. It's socially and politically correct to send invitations to us for this and that, in Nashville at least. But I think this invitation to beloved community coincides with the national remembrance of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. 50 years ago. This past April 4th, in my hometown of Memphis, throngs of people made pilgrimage to the balcony of the Lorraine Motel to remember the martyrdom of a nonviolent ebony prophet and Baptist preacher from the South. We all remember that tragic day and the riots and the burning cities in the aftermath of his murder. We all wished the burning firestorm of urban cities that broke out around the country in 1968 would 50 years later be completely put out by constant acts of justice to end the injustice and arrangements of poverty and crime. But in 2018, America, to reference the giant black literary author of The Fire Next Time, James Baldwin, America is a house still burning. I stand here to open this first plenary session having a disturbing edge in my spirit, yet with a hopeful imagination about these fires. As the country gets closer to a national nihilism of lovelessness, listlessness, and the hubris of a toxic nationalism, we are hard-pressed to find collective resolve and ethical strength to reverse the moral compass of the country back to true north. Our nation's loose threads of incivility and injustices threaten to unravel the whole garment of our democracy. And we all know it and see it. America's refusal of the invitation to beloved community has allowed the worst demons than in the 1960s of racism to re-enter the house of America. You remember that story where Jesus told the parable of a demon that was cast out of the house. And after years of vacating that house, came back, looked in the house and saw that the furniture had not been rearranged. The decor of racism was still the same. Whiteness and blackness still confused in a matrix of hate and immoral disarray. And you know what the demon said? The demon said, no, I won't enter right now. I'm going to go back and get 7 more demons worse than I was in the 1960s. And re-enter the house. It is the same kind of demonic madness, cultural madness of racial segregation of the 60s, the genocidal social death mentality of North American slavery, big demon. The outgrowth of Anglo-Saxon Aryanism and racial superiority, big demon. That threatens to destroy a civil and just democracy for our children's future. Though it appears in different cultural and ideological garbs, its violence is occurring in massacres in Gaza, poverty in Haiti, and though camouflaged in assumed mental illness, the episodic occurrences of mass violence we saw in Charleston, South Carolina, where 9 people were murdered during prayer and Bible study at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, and Las Vegas, Nevada, where some 58 people lost their lives, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Charlottesville, Virginia, where mob madness ended the life of a celebrated justice activist, Heather Hay, and the most recent Waffle House murders here in Nashville, and the high school mass murders in Parkland, Florida, and last week in Santa Fe, Texas. Worse demons have come and entered our house. These are part and parcel of the psychosocial matrix of evil, a local and global manifestation of variations of the disease and cancer of white supremacy that breeds xenophobia, violence, and racism. I am not suggesting that these are parallel events that mimic the worst tragedies of history, but they follow the pathological trail of America's myth of race, and like diabetes, affect quietly all the vital organs of the body. Creates conditions that disease adjust democracy in this country and around the world. And I just became more attentive to my own struggle with diabetes as a part of my family's health history when the doctor said, I need to examine your eyes. I said, what are you going to examine my eyes for? He said, in your eye and in the layers there, in the vision, there can be signs of diabetes. And maybe this slow, out of control disease of racism has so affected the eyesight and vision of America that we cannot see where we are. And to be able to do the stitching that I'm talking about, you've got to see precisely where the problem is. Thus, I posit that restitching life to love and love to liberation is the singular vocation or calling of our collective humanity. Liberation is the politics of love. Liberation is a political discourse. Liberation is changing social arrangements so that those arrangements no longer can oppress and exploit the weak. That's the politics of love. And life is the garment of our humanity stitched together in and by the divine love. I ought to recognize you simply because we were created by the same love. And all the things that go with your existence and my existence and the need to fulfill the intention of our creation ought to be honored by everybody. This godly love was so prominently on display in a Palestinian Jew that King became a follower of the love ethic of Jesus. It was out of this love ethic that he aligned the mission of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to redeem the soul of America. It was a redemptive mission in my metaphoric mind to stitch life to love, love to liberation, and love to justice to eliminate racial segregation and racial economic apartheid conditions in America. We know his life. We know his life was cut short as he began to weave the garment of an inclusive community of justice and liberation for the poor, to cease the militaristic assault of an unjust war in Vietnam, and renew the promises of democracy for a new humanity. We know he didn't finish stitching the garment. King knew the vision of beloved community was a symbiotic reality that required new structures for a new day of justice. But April 4th, 1968, King's optimism for the beloved community met with the dark hatred and racism of America. He warned on July the 2nd, 1967, 9 months before his murder on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, America must resolve the race problem, or the race problem will doom America. I wonder if you see, as I see, the luminous clouds of darkness gathering that makes King's prophecy believable every day. I know it's hard to say because of the materiality of capitalism and all the ways in which we measure our flourishing. But against the dark realities that we face, there is a national mood of reality no one hardly wants to own, nor does our government seemingly has the integrity to own its flaws and social sins. The tattered fringes of our common life says it all. No one knows what to trust or who to trust. Corrupt systems arrangements have so infiltrated our cultural mindset that it's hard to find the character of justice in public spaces. We have no problem, some of us with clarity. We see the lies, the perversion of our common language, the oppression, the tyranny, the inhumanity to children around the world. In Gaza, migrant dreamers, police killings of innocent black youth, mass incarceration, the criminalization of the poor, suffering and famine created by wealth gaps that benefit a few. Our culture of violence has come home to roost in our schools and public spaces, and we hardly know what to do to reverse the insane pathology and course of American incivility. Martin Luther King Jr. has become for us a backward turned prophet. You see, it's easier to honor him with hindsight, to predict after everything has already happened and continues to happen. So hindsight, we look at King and interpret our reality then, but do not have something that's blocking our interpretation of the reality now. The monuments, museums, streets named after him do more to domesticate and plagiarize his vision than inspire a revolution of values that King says must occur if America would ever lead the way of creating the beloved community in the world. Now the nation's illusions about democracy has caught up with us. America was and is fundamentally a racial ideology. White supremacy saturates the nation's principles, or as Ralph Ellison puts it, that racism is like a boil bursting forth from impurities in the bloodstream of democracy. America's racist culture killed Martin Luther King Jr. It killed Emmett Till in August 1955. It killed Michael Brown. It killed Trayvon Martin. It killed Sandra Bland and a host of others. When are we going to own the organized death killing due to white supremacy and racist cultures? And until we own it, own the disease, it will continue to mutate and morph in different realities. At this point, allow an at-length reading of Oswald McCall's poem, Hand of God. Be under no illusion. You should gather to yourself the images you love. As you go, the shapes, the lights, the shadows of the things you have preferred will come to you, yes, inevitably, as bees to their hives. And there in your mind and spirit, they will leave their distilled essence sweet as honey or bitter as gall. As year add to years, that face of yours, which once lay smooth in your baby crib, like an unwritten page, will take to itself lines and still more lines. And as the parchments of an old historian who jealously sets down all the story, and there more than assets etched still will grow the inscribed narrative of your mental habits, the emotions of your heart, your sense of conscience, your response to duty, what you think of God and of your neighbor and of yourself. It will be all there, for people become like that which they love, and the name thereof is written on their brow. When one sees white males live with the illusions of racial epitaphs from the Jim Crow era, Nazi tattoos of Aryanism, and weaponized to protect whiteness, a supremacist mental narrative has been written on their brow. Dylan Strong Roof, born April 3rd, 1994. A young American white male murdered 9 people in that AME church in South Carolina. He entered the Bible study and entered there with a racial manifesto etched on his mental narrative. And when asked why he committed the murders of 9 innocent people, he said and I quote, I had to do it. Original with this mental narrative is the ethos of racism. It is the habit of racial violence to protect whiteness at all levels of education, social enterprises, and how the nationalist grammar of grammar, the nationalist grammar of democracy, rather, keeps this narrative going. The habit of whiteness sanctions the conduct of a Dylan Roof and the will of America. In different forms, not to all extremes. Sometimes we act and react to the extremes expression of it. But the subtle, gradual decisions in government, in white churches, black churches, to separate and to keep our lives from being stitched together. Our suburban lifestyles, our consumerism, our politics of identities, keep us in the habit of whiteness. It reinforces traditional ways of thinking and doing things and provides what John Dewey, American philosopher, psychologist, called the center of gravity in morality. In a sense that our actions are often justified through conformity with ancestral habits. Dylan Roof. 1994, the math, he was just how old? Real quick, help me. 1994, if he was born, how old is he today? 24 years old. How did that narrative get written on his brow? How did that mental narrative inscribe him in his DNA as deep as acid etched steel? America keeps passing on this mental narrative with illusions and habits, lacking moral imagination to face the truth of who we are. Now, a nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. For the traitor appears not a traitor. He speaks in the accents familiar to his victims, and he appeals to the baseless that lies deep in the hearts of people. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of a city. He infests the body politic so that it can no longer resist. That's what Cicero, out of his mouth, said in 42 BC, warning what happens when we live with illusions and habits and lacking moral authority. South African preacher and theologian Paul Masiza, president of the Baptist World Alliance, who spoke to us here at the college's Gun and Neighbor Lectures series earlier this year, asked a poignant question. How could America, after Barack Obama and 50 years after Martin Luther King Jr., elect Donald Trump as president of the United States? How could that happen? Who was present when Paul asked that question? Well, he's from South Africa, hadn't been through apartheid, and came here to ask us, how could we elect I'm asking the Spirit to quiet me down.
I hear you.
No experience. No intelligentsia. knows how to corrupt systems to be a billionaire. How could? It may be that the inscribed Miller narrative on his brow is that he could not stomach his predecessors' blackness. I didn't say anything about what Barack Obama did in office, but he couldn't stomach his blackness as the commander-in-chief. And believe it or not, even in the most liberal ways of interpreting blackness, in certain places of power and position, America cannot stomach blackness. I'm trying to move us to really be with integrity to offer this invitation. Because you can't offer the invitation if you're going to invite blackness and you can't stomach it. And it's only going to be in gatherings that you control and narratives that you spin and politics that relate to your sensibilities. But if you're going to stomach my blackness, you have to stomach Nat Turner. You have to stomach Malcolm X, Fannie Lou Hamer. It's difficult for many to face the illusions and distortions that guide America today. You know, self-deception is a comfortable vanity, even when it's in open view. Nonetheless, self-deception works most often unnoticed, unchallenged, and escapes serious questioning only until it hurts and wounds more than just the poor and the vulnerable. Wow. But when you see young white teenagers crying in Parkland, Florida, and Santa Fe, Texas, when you see the public wounded so deeply by what has been happening to black folk in America since their existence, all of a sudden our attention stands to salute another reality that we didn't want to affirm. The enshrined idols and disease of racism. Its morphing and multiple mutations in white supremacy is written on the brow of the psyche of the American conscience. It fuels consumerism, social scapegoating, always blaming the poor for economic and moral deficits, then naming what drives race and culture in America. King paid the ultimate price for shattering America's pristine racial myth and illusions of white supremacy. The inextricably triplet of evil, poverty, racism, and militarism etched on America's brow is still her dominant mental narrative. It is why at public events we honor and celebrate the military and wave the red, white, and blue flag, symbol of our loyalty to the illusions of a just democracy. The flag is the only thing we got. And so when somebody takes a knee, because it has not been the reality of black people's lives, when somebody takes a knee in the posture of prayer to protest against its illusions, somebody gets to the White House and say you ought to get those sons of bitches off the field. How can this White House issue the invitation of beloved community? How can one who opens the rotunda, and I appreciate the long life and legacy of Billy Graham and what he did in the evangelical movement in this country, and opens the rotunda for him to lie in state, the president But he cannot invite the poor, cannot embrace the reality of the marginalized. He cannot embrace and send an invitation to SH countries in Africa. Well, Jesus was born in an HH, an SH country, in Galilee, in Nazareth. It was a SH place. I didn't want to go there so early, but I know no period of history where America has been a just nation. I've been in this for a long time. Brother Thee Smith, my colleague, Professor at Emory, and I've been looking at the ethics and the theology and the history. Just like you, I just can't find where America has ever been a just nation. Justice has only come by martyrs' blood, who stitched with that blood life to love and made the ultimate sacrifice to advance God's reign of shalom in the world. So when a Make America Great Again becomes the hashtag of a new base of patriotism, it resurfaces memories of George Wallace, who said segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. Now another generation's blood is being required to change the moral nihilism and mental narrative of those who say we are yet to be the United States of America. Perhaps the most troubling sign of our time is the possibility that we won't see the demonic character of our nation, until it stands boldly before us without disguise. We wear the mask, grin and smile, the poet says, but our countenance show the darkness of a nihilistic character in our democracy that did not occur overnight. It has been imperceptibly evolving since the early days of this republic. As my former, now deceased dean and faculty colleague Jack Forsman stated in his epic book, Christian Faith in Dark Times, Theological Conflict in the Shadow of Hitler, every time and place limps and exposes its Achilles tendons. I would not venture to suggest that America stands in the shadow of Hitlerism, but Trumpism borders on bringing ruin to democracy as we desire to see it. If we offer the invitation of beloved community, if we offer it, it will come with saying a hard no to returning to a nationalist identity politic and dominant ideology of politics without conscience that exploits and oppresses life, the life of the global poor. We must get beyond it. We must get beyond it, rewrite the invitation, reissue it out of the integrity of our sense of connection. It will help us get beyond the civil rights games, so to speak, because the broader reach of the civil rights movement never reached the boundaries of the beloved community. Got us closer. But we need a more moral, creative exchange of our love and integrity for God's presence and power in the world for this new humanity to emerge. James Cone, reading that article, pointed out as I read it that when we consider that white enslaved blacks for 246 years and then segregated and lynched them for another 100 years, accumulating wealth, as blacks were excluded from acquiring it, we can see that 15 years of the civil rights activity, marching and sitting in, were not enough to erase the tremendous inequities of 3.5 centuries of legalized slavery and segregation. All it did was left in place white supremacy. Equality? Was that the goal of the civil rights movement? Fannie Lou Hamer, a reporter asked her that question. She said, no. What would I look like fighting for equality with the white man? I don't want to go down that low. I want the true democracy that will raise me and the white man up, raise America up. And in that moment in Memphis at Mason Temple, King's prophetic speech, hope and imagination was full throttle to speak a reality to raise America up. Even to this day, America is unprepared to accept the invitation to the promised land. The Reverend William Barber recently said in Washington, as I move hurriedly to a close, that if we are to reissue the invitation, we need a new moral narrative. But if we're going to have a new moral narrative, we need a new moral narrator. King was a moral narrator, a beloved community. And I think the narrator may not be in the halls of academia, may not be in the halls of Congress or the Senate, may not be in the elite venues of economic power in this country. However humanitarian and generous and charitable they might be to give monies to solve problems white supremacy has created, the new moral narrators might be the poor, the prisoner, who understands how God lifts up and liberates even in spite of the pharaohs of our time. And I want to say right here, I hope I get that invitation from them in my mail. I get it every day here. We have stories of people who sent us an invitation to a beloved community, and we could point them out story by story of students incarcerated, but God sent the invitation in behind the prison wall, invited them to beloved community, and they sat among us today, liberated because love wouldn't quit. Liberated because justice knows how to get behind systems and change and transform them. Amen. That's why this institution, American Baptist College, is still open. We keep getting in the mail invitations to a beloved community. We still refuse to domesticate and tolerate King as a prophet just so he could be convenient for us to mimic America's worst habits. And if you want to know our challenge to black audiences when I'm up doing this kind of thing, I'm challenging them, don't mimic the worst of America. Find what is best in America and mimic that. Now, you may be hard-pressed to find it, but there's some best of America. All right. The revolution of values is the best that we can do for America. Let me skip some of this and end with a story of my mother, great-grandmother, and grandmother. My mother, Sally, my great-grandmother, Charity, and my grandmother, Marie. This metaphor of stitching comes from me watching them under the big shade tree. When Grandma Charity would come to Memphis from Detroit, they would get under the big tree and lay out the crossbars to stitch quilts. All day, early in the morning, shade was on that tree, and they would bring garments of different cuts and ties of cut up and patches from various places and stitch them into a quilt. I watched them stitch. There were 3 generations of motherhood, matriarchy in the black experience, stitching a quilt together. And when they got through stitching the variations of sizes of cloth and colors together, they turned the garment over and pulled the cross stitches even. And I was the recipient of that first, one of those quilts. They stitched a quilt for each of us to take to college. I took that quilt to college, and when, in those days when the college heat didn't work, the garment of what they stitched was around me and kept me warm. The other day, just this weekend, I was in Cincinnati because I passed on that garment, that quilt, to my daughter who went to Howard. And it was folded up right by the couch. And I had to pull it around me one more time, but I noticed that the patches were loose, the threads were tattered, and I said to Kara, my granddaughter, if this quilt is going to make it to the next generation, somebody has got to restitch the garment of justice and love. Restitch the garment so you can pass it on to your daughter and to my grandson. Well, as I have a whole lot I wanted to say. I don't want to keep you long. It's 1 o'clock. But the black preacher has arrived in this place. I wanted to make sure that you understood that black preaching and scholarship are not antithetical to each other. It was not antithetical to King. King brought his scholarship into the body of the power of black preaching. And as you heard on the documentary, talked about Nietzsche and talked about all of the things in which Bart and others hope to find in America. But when you get through with us, all we're looking for is a stitch to humanity. Somebody can stitch us with love. Somebody can stitch us with compassion. Somebody can stitch us with reconciliation. But we got to get rid of the illusions, the distortions that keep us from being communal in the task of stitching together the quilt of beloved community. Oh, my brothers and sisters, I want to put the needle in your hand. And the needle that I want to put in your hand is the old rugged cross. Take the end vertical and horizontal of the cross. As James Cone would call it, the lynching tree. Take the needle point of the cross and stitch it into the hate, xenophobia, American essentialism, America hegemonic attitudes and dispositions of political power, stick the needle of the cross into the toxicity of American racism. And organizations like yours, Theology and Peace, with that needle can stitch together a garment. Oh, it can happen. Don't underestimate what your story and my story together as stitches can do. I was shocked just like you were shocked when Harry and Meghan royal wedding found the stitch in the voice of Bishop Michael Curry. Don't take for granted that happened just coincidentally. That was just a creative imagination and a moment. No, God has been stitching. Because England is the crown mecca of colonial oppression, right in the midst of all of that aristocracy. Michael Curry quoted King, the power of redemptive love. And then Meghan, in her own ontology and own sense of herself, refused to give up to royalty what God had given as a better royalty, a sense of herself. We're so impressed with the royalty of England. No, I'm impressed with the royalty of God's image. And she had them sing, "Stand by me. Stand by me when the storms of life are raging. Stand by me." Glory, hallelujah. Stand by me. Let us stand by each other. With the tellus black playing the fiddle. Stand by me. That wedding got so black, I guarantee you, the reason why the stiff aristocracy on the camera and the folks started interpreting that Curry went too long is that they didn't understand what was going on. It takes time to stitch. And then they couldn't get through. And I like the England, nuances, how they speak. The black church has never appeared in the Church of England, but he didn't know God was stitching. Come on. And they started to walk out, and they said, "Amen."